Today's topic is titled Data Governance is Not Meeting Its Potential to Govern AI, featuring Dr. Susan Aaronson. So Susan is Research Professor of International Affairs at George Washington University. She's the co-principal investigator with the National Science Foundation and National Institute of Standards and Technology Institute for Trustworthy AI in Law and Society.
So I, in 2017, I did the survey of digital trade of people around the world. And I can't say it was a very successful survey because we only got, I don't remember the exact amount, but like 500 responses globally. But we did get a lot of policymakers to respond. And what we found was they were setting rules for data-driven technologies, and they had very little understanding of those technologies and their implications for their own people and the world at large. And so I convinced several foundations in the United States to support an effort to educate policymakers and the public about data-driven technologies and digital trade, creating the hub. And then we realized, okay, really the problem is that people don't know how to govern data, right? Data is very different from other things. It's a good and a service simultaneously. It's an import and export. You can't tell when it is imported or exported, right? It is also simultaneously a commercial asset, but it could also be a public good. And you might see potential in it that I can't see. Given that, it's really hard to govern. And so what we thought is, why not create some sort of means of trying to understand what good data governance looks like? And at the time, we called that comprehensive data governance. And at GW, I'm lucky to have several colleagues who have created metrics, including the multidimensional poverty metric, because I had never created one and I had no idea how to do it. So we did get a lot of feedback from people who had experience, as well as we worked with the World Bank on the first metric. Okay, and so the metric was a metric of comprehensive data governance, and we did it from 2019 to 2024. And then I realized that AI was totally changing data governance. So that's the underlying hypothesis. Does anyone want to disagree with me or agree with me about that?
Agree.
Okay, thank you. Patty, were you going to say something? It looked like you were going to say something.
Oh, I'm in total agreement.
Okay.
Can't wait to hear what comes next.
So we thought, okay, it's time to rethink this, which is a dangerous thing on one hand, because it meant I needed to raise money. It also meant that basically admitting that is a good thing and a bad thing, because we had to rethink the metric. We had 5 years of data, which is the minimum that you need for a good metric, right? So you can examine change over time. But it also very much worried me. And so far, I haven't raised all the money for it. I mean, NSF funds part of it, and Omidyar is funding, has said that they'll fund some of it, but I don't have all the money I need to really do this right. But we have moved ahead in any case. So here's the World Bank's definition of data governance. It's pretty good, I think. Norms, infrastructure, policies, laws, and regulations, and institutions, lots of ands there, that can effectively enable the safe, trustworthy use of various types of AI. And what I realized, and I already have written a published paper on this, that something weird has gone on, which is, on one hand, AI is changing how we govern data, and yet many policymakers have not thought of using data governance as a tool to make AI, let's say, more responsible, more transparent and accountable, et cetera. So that's in itself also quite weird, I think. Ironically, I am making this presentation to you guys the day after the EU actually did something about this, which is yesterday. They issued guidance that is mandatory for any company selling an AI, producing or selling AI models. They have to provide information on a template about data governance and the data that they use to create the model. So it's starting to happen. Okay. So, oops. So traditionally, these are the goals of data governance: to facilitate data access by making data open, usable, and shareable, right? So you take the world's data and you want to be able to have access to as much as you can without violating human rights. Okay. And then you want to build trust, you want to protect national security or social stability, and you want to strengthen people's ability to control the data that they generate. And this is going to be particularly important in the future because, we pay way too much attention to AI and ignore technologies like XR, which are going to be, or neural technologies, which are going to make it so easy to manipulate us using our data. And I am terrified of that, but it is already happening. And in addition, today, they use policymakers to find a shared approach to evaluating data. Now, Canada and the US and the other members of the OECD have come up with a template to value data, but only China has put in place such a template. And only China has markets for data and allows firms to put data as having value on their in their financial reporting. So they can value data as an asset or a liability. And we can talk about that, but no one in the nation has done that so far. China also has the first transparent data markets in several cities where you can buy and sell data. They also protect personal privacy. They have very strong personal data protection laws for firms, but the government can do whatever they want with your personal data. So it's very different from, let's say, the United States or Canada, where the government is limited. In the United States, firms are not so limited. Canada, firms are limited, but the government, has very strict restrictions on its use of personal data. All this is changing in the United States under Trump, and we can talk about that at another time. And that's also scary. Okay, so today they also require data provenance information. That's the EU guidelines that I talked about. They're trying to facilitate AI sovereignty, which is terminology that I have to admit I laugh about all the time, because it seems to me very odd and ironic that AI, which is built on the world's data and built on the world's expertise, nations think they can be sovereign over that. I understand why they might want to be, but knowledge by definition should be shared. You can't be sovereign over knowledge. So anybody have any thoughts so far? Yeah, hi, I don't know your name.
Fabrice. I did have a question about, you mentioned market. So in China, a state-run data market?
It's a state-run market, but it operates according to market principles. Okay. So, I mean, China is a market-driven society to a great extent, except that the states, at localities, in the federal government, provincial governments, have significant control over the private sector. So it's this weird mix.
But it's more like because in the US, right, like Amazon has a big marketplace where you can buy varied data sets.
Yeah.
So is it similar to that, or
no,
more like a trading?
It's Amazon can only buy and sell a data that it controls, right? And this is like an unfettered market of all sorts of sources of data can be bought and sold. And I think that's pretty revolutionary because it brings transparency to something that's quite opaque right now.
Yeah.
Thank you for your question. Any other thoughts? Okay. So a couple of the other goals are to ensure that I mean, you might disagree with me about this one, but I do think even in the United States, there's this sense that the data giants should not dominate AI as with social networks, that data should be as widely shared as possible and not controlled by a few companies. Okay, and then to ensure AI literacy is another thing that some governments have tried to do. And I would cite in this regard Finland and Sweden, and you're starting to see more of this, Brazil, some other countries. Okay, so it seems to me that data governance is a lost opportunity. Hey, does anyone online have any questions, or I don't, I can't see you, but if you wanna ask anything or criticize anything, I'd love to hear it.
I'll monitor.
Okay, all right, so data governance is a lost opportunity to build trust. Okay, now here, we know that the EU is example, despite pretty strong intellectual property and data protection laws at the national and EU-wide level, they haven't enforced it. And we saw that through when we learned how, let's say, ChatGPT and other chatbots source data through web scraping, right? Now, web scraping was designed to ensure the health of the web. It was not designed to provide a cheap and easy data source for AI, but because it is global, essentially, and it provides a snapshot of the web, that is how many AI companies got large data sets by scraping, perfectly legal in most countries. But it showed that enforcement was not, excuse my passive voice sentence, it showed that policymakers were not enforcing their own laws, right? Okay, secondly, large troves of data by definition create national security problems. Because they can be, and you and I cannot predict what troves of data are going to become national security problems, whether it's a data set of Strava users, whether it's the genetic or the health history of people who applied to join the US Army or the Canadian Army. So, we need to address those. We need to think about them. We need to have a public process, and I've seen that in no country. What makes me really mad is that we want data sets to be as accurate, complete, as representative as possible. That is what makes for data quality. And yet, no government provides incentives for that and says, hey, have you done everything that you can to make sure that your AI doesn't hallucinate by trying to have the most accurate, complete, and representative data sets? So here, that's a lost opportunity. And then, as I said, to address corporate control of data, that's something that, for example, the United States should do, cares about, but hasn't. Another thing is around the world, the market for data is mainly seen as through data brokers who are opaque in many countries, their activities. And, some countries limit their sales, but not enough. Then, ensuring that the data giants don't monopolize the data for foundation models and hence the models themselves, and then to address data hoarding. So data hoarding might be a term you've not heard of, but more and more firms say you can't scrape my website unless you pay for it. And so that's a barrier, that's a form of data hoarding, but also more and more governments do not allow public data to be shared. Now, there are good reasons for that in most instances, but not in all instances. And again, like if you do public health, for example, apparently the British government has a very open data set of a long-standing survey of British people who received federally funded healthcare in the UK. And that's a widely used data set. And if that data set were limited, some of the science in public health would be frozen unless someone created another equally open data set. But that data set itself, while the UK is a diverse country, you want to make that data set available and then as accurate, complete, and representative as possible. So, we want to find ways to have data governance find this balance if you want AI to be an effective tool. Okay, so what we tried to do is answer the research question, which is, has it led to this rethinking since ChatGPT? So, you know, ChatGPT was not the first chatbot, as you all know, but it was the first widely used. So 2022 November, right? Okay, and then if it did, what was behind this? Why did countries change their policies if they did? Who were the beneficiaries? And what are the gaps in data governance, which is, you know, getting back to the lost opportunity thing. Okay. And then this was our research strategy. So we created this data set. Okay, and then we wanted to check it. So we started doing this. We have a diverse group. Our data set is 68 countries of the EU, but the check was only of the 15 countries. And then we're gonna do this work, which is our funding request. Okay, now here's what we had in the past, right? And here's the new thing since 2022. It does not include the transparency regulation of the EU. And I should have known about that. I didn't know when it was coming. So it'll be 9 tomorrow, but so I think we should concentrate on what's new because we're not giving up on these things, but you know, we've been doing this for 5 years. So the new stuff, restrictions on the national security rationale for data, right? So China cannot, or the 6, you know, nations that the United States does not allow data broker sales to. Of course, this is ridiculous, the data broker sale ban, because can only ban data brokers in the United States that operate in the United States from selling this data, but you could go to Jamaica and use a data broker there and get the same data probably. Okay, regulation guidance on data assetization. So that's China alone. In the past, we always said we're not going to add something to the metric unless 2 countries agree to it, but we felt we had to do this one country. So this is China. But in the next year, I think there will start to be debate and attempts to have data as an asset in other countries, including Canada. Okay, so law authorizing data markets. Again, that's China. Binding AI governance rules on data transparency and provenance. So that's the EU and China. Soon, I think Brazil is moving in this direction. You're probably familiar with this trend. Government-funded LLMs using national data assets. So the idea here is if you're Kazakhstan and nobody outside of Kazakhstan speaks your language, you might want to create an LLM that builds on Kazakh language. And we've seen lots of countries do this. Ukraine is another prominent example of this. And then there are international ones using international data sets. So examples of that are Falcon from the UAE, and Singapore has one, I forgot the name right now, but it takes Asian languages for small countries or smaller groups of ethnic identities and creates a large language model that includes that. Okay, and then AI literacy requirements and establish a minister for AI. So our metric, I forgot to say that our metric includes not just strategies, but also institutional change. So if there's a new job, a new skill, a new ministry, we include it in the metric. Any thoughts?
Good question. I just want to understand your chart. So this is cumulative. These things are being added to these things.
Yes, so these things we've always had.
Yeah.
Since 2019. So there's nothing new there. If data governance is changing, things are going away or things are brand new. So these are the things that are new.
And essentially what you're doing is tracking what's happening. You're not saying this is optimal. You're not weighing in
Oh,
some sort of normative judgment about
Never.
when you say it,
Never.
data governance should
Now,
look like X or Y.
right. Now, Patty, you bring up something anytime you create a metric, it becomes a beauty contest. And so we've had like governments just recently send an email to us. I mean, like, who'd have thunk anybody cares about our metric? But I think we've had 3 governments now say, how can we improve our score on your metric? And I always have to laugh at that and like say, why don't you consider having a democratic discussion over transparency of public participation and regulation of AI, like really ask people what they think, whatever. But it cannot be a beauty contest, and we don't, we can't judge countries. We have opinions, but the metric itself does not have opinions. And so it can't be that. But it should like get, hopefully, people thinking of what does good governance for AI look like? Because, and the reason I say this is because governance is failing, right? It's losing the trust of many people. And I think AI has played a role in that. And we could talk about that at some point. But data governance is going to be a key part of governance, right? This is the most dominant thing in the world, data. And, it hasn't always been that, but it can't be any more important. And so we need a better understanding of how governments think about this thing and how they value it, okay, and how AI is changing. Okay, and so this is just, some of the things that, you got to do when you apply for grants, which is you do outreach and how you measure your success over time. And so this is just how we're going to do this. Excuse me. I think it's one of the things that is most interesting to me is the AI literacy thing, that there is more and more interest around the world. Like I said, the Swedes and the Finns were among the first around 2018 to say, AI is going to be a form of governance. By the way, this is Henry Farrell's. I don't know if you all know the political science Henry Farrell, but he has a very controversial article called AI as Governance. And it's sort of built, he never cites Lawrence Lessig, but Lawrence Lessig is a legal scholar who came up with the idea that code is law. And so AI obviously builds on that, AI as governance. But it is true. Around the world, AI is a form of governance. I just want to give you an example of this. As example, you're probably familiar with the Dutch government. When they decided that there were a bunch of tax cheats. And so they used AI to determine who was cheating. And the AI wasn't perfect, because AI never is perfect, just like humans. And they ended up kicking a lot of people off the rolls. And they took away children from those people until eventually it was realized they made a major mistake in governance and in relying on this particular AI. And that happened during the COVID pandemic in terms of decisions in the UK about who got to go to the Russell schools, the top schools in the UK, the Cambridge universities, etc. And apparently they used AI to make that decision. So again, AI code was making governance decisions that had once been made by humans. Now, I'm not saying there weren't humans in the loop, but more and more governments are using AI to save money, including my own nutty
Thank you,
place.
Susan, and please join me. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you.